There are so many different things that go into winning a dynasty league. A lot of people will say that you need to make the big boy trades or nail all of your rookie draft picks. And while there are some big moves that move the needle more, there are a lot of small things you can be doing consistently that will help your team that much more over time. I have several tips, practices, and mindsets that you can use to make your team that much better with good practice. You may have heard us reference these points on the channel at some point. You might think you know all the tricks of the trade, but I can almost promise you that you don't know every tip on this list. But hey, before we get into it, I do hope you all enjoy the video. Please leave a like if you do. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. Which of these tactical advantages is set to help you the most going forward? And what other tactical advantages do you already use in your league? But hey, with all that said, let's get right to the content you came for. In a video a while back, we touched on the concept of value scouting. You may not have heard that term before because I kind of made it up in the middle of a video without even knowing it. Simply put, it's just a practice of looking at players and figuring out how they can create value for my team or for another team, and that's how you generate value as well. Ask yourself questions like this. Is this player a buy low that I can flip later? That's maybe being undervalued because of an injury or low production over time. Are they a clear handcuff that might help me down the road or someone else who actually has that starting running back on their team? Is this a player that has potential to put up a consistent amount of fantasy points over a decent amount of time that I can add for a simple waiver wire priority or fab pickup? Basically, in what ways can I extrapolate more value out of a player than what I paid to get them on my team? And is something like that even possible with the player in question? That concept will be a running theme throughout the course of the video, so that's why I touched on that first. And absolutely, this is a concept that will take some practice, especially if you're new to Dynasty. The first thing I want to touch on under the lens of value scouting is turning fab into draft capital. You're not going to be able to trade fab straight up for draft capital in leagues. In some leagues, maybe, but more often than not, probably not going to be the case. The reason for that is because draft capital is going to be favored far more than any fab, waiver pickup, or anything like that will be, because when you look at draft capital, it's the first chance you possibly have to acquire a new player coming into the league. Obviously, at this point, we're beyond the startup draft, so everybody that's on waivers had a chance to be picked up in the startup draft, or had a chance to be picked up in the rookie draft as well. And we do have to put into perspective that the reason why fab and waiver pickups are not super valuable is because of the fact that they're not going to put that much fantasy points into your lineup consistently over time, at least in most cases for the long haul. However, in my opinion, the best thing you can do with fab is go pick up the hot player right now, particularly in season when points are needed to be put up right now, and either use that to chuck that player into your lineup or flip that to some other player in need of that player more than you are. A few great examples last season was Zay Jones, Jerick McKinnon, and Zonovan Knight. If you would have picked those players up, what could you exchange those players for to a competitive team? Obviously, if you didn't need those players starting in your starting lineup. In my opinion, none of those guys fit the long-term vision, and if you didn't sell then, you probably missed your chance. But going forward, how can you extrapolate value from those players? Can you get a prospect in return that maybe hasn't broke out yet? Or can you get another re-roll in the draft? At the end of the day, you have to consider the fact that there is a way to convert fab into draft capital without trying to trade for it straight up. And if you're able to do this, especially while you're rebuilding or even when you're competing and don't need that player on your roster that you just picked up, and then do this consistently, you can make huge impacts to your roster over time. The next thing you want to do when you're talking about value scouting is players that are already on your own roster. How can you get the most out of your draft picks, out of your fab, and obviously the players you have? Let's talk about draft picks first. The first rule of draft picks that you need to hammer through your head right now is not every draft pick has to be used to draft a player. In fact, I'd advise against that in most cases. But Bob, you always advocate for building an asset pool, especially draft picks. The reason for this is because draft picks are a universal currency for every single league. Managers won't love every single player, but I can guarantee you they will love draft capital. It's important to note that draft picks are the most valuable after the NFL season, and they get incrementally more valuable every single day leading up to your own rookie draft, the NFL draft, until you are on the clock with that pick. That pick gains much more value over time. You can use this to trade down in drafts and get more draft capital coming back your way, or you can trade out for established veterans at what I'll say is a pretty nice discount. And the next beautiful thing about having a ton of draft picks in any single draft, you can trade up almost at will. No more sitting around risking waiting on that player hoping they fall to you. It's as simple as texting that manager, hey, what's up? What do you need for this pick? I'll give you my next pick and the following pick. Here, done. Let's make this a deal. Not to mention, when you own most of the draft board, you get to set the market value on picks. Now let's talk about that fab one last time in this video. People often forget or don't treat fab as a respectable asset. And quite honestly, that's their mistake. When you use fab, like we discussed earlier, you can exploit another tactical advantage. Get fab thrown in trades, even if it's a few dollars here and there. Use this to be able to add the hot topic players and then flip those for draft capital and the cycle keeps going and going, especially when you can flip that player in question before the hype wears off and maximize value on that deal. This is another way you can exploit value with players. Think of it like this. There's always an ongoing scale between players and draft picks. I don't remember which hand I made which, so bear with me. When we're at this point in the offseason, after the regular season and before the NFL draft, picks are more valuable than players, which means you can use the inflated value of picks to go get players at a reasonable discount. But after the NFL draft and your rookie draft, those values flip again. Now, players are more valuable and picks are a little less valuable. Think of which one you need more immediately. Which need is coming sooner? Needing draft picks to draft players or players to start in starting lineups? The closer you get to either or and the further away you get from the other respectively, the value scales will shift. So as I mentioned, right now in the offseason, the value is heavily slanted towards rookie draft picks, which if you're a competitive team with decent draft capital, not the 110, 111, or 112, you might be better served taking that mid-first round pick to go get an established running back like a Najee Harris or a Josh Jacobs, as opposed to running the risk of a rookie not really doing a whole lot in their first season. And while you can get those veterans at a decent discount right now, the one thing you have to acknowledge is you need to be willing to bite the bullet on any value hits they might take between now and the regular season. With a lot of running backs right now, situations are up in the air. And that is part of why some veterans are so valuable this time of year. After free agency, after the rookie draft, so much gets clarified on what these guys will be doing this coming season, or at least there's a better picture to be painted, to be seen at that point. Talking on another way you can manipulate values and take tactical advantages is by using buy-sell windows effectively. Values fluctuate constantly. If you can learn to ride the wave and see the dips in perceived value versus actual value plus production and actual value, you'll have added a valuable weapon to your toolkit. Let's talk about a couple players that fit this bill from last season. Last season, there were active sell windows for players like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Michael Thomas. Both started off the season pretty well. This opened a massive sell window. And while you weren't getting peak value for these players at that time, it's a heck of a lot better than what you're getting now. I know for players like that, when you invest so much and get back so little at the end of the day, it hurts. But like I said, it's a heck of a lot better than what you're getting now. Sometimes the best value scouting play is to take some value before there's none to be had. Now, buy windows can be a little more tricky. A lot of times people will mistake a buy low window for just an accessibility window. Really, you're not buying low in this case. If anything, that player just becomes more accessible, either via injury or lack of production over time. But this likely leads to an easier buy at a more appropriate value. While not buying cheaply, it's still an important distinction to make. And then, of course, there will be situations where you are buying low on a player who's either kind of lost all value, just doesn't cost that much, has a lot of ceiling to kind of grow into. Like an example of somebody to actually buy low on right now is probably someone like Hygiene, who's shown some potential, doesn't cost you much at all, but does have some potential. Another point here is talking about moving running back handcuffs, specifically making sure you're moving these at the right time. Whether I've gotten a handcuff through the startup, through waivers, the rookie draft, a player situation on my roster already exists, that situation changed in free agency, I'm not really one for harboring handcuffs that aren't mine. But I can definitely acknowledge that there is a time and a place for that, especially in the world of fab flipping, which is what we discussed earlier of adding a player via fab, then flipping them for some sort of draft capital or other prospect that has a better shot to re-roll in the league and be more relevant someday. But back to my point, I can definitely acknowledge that there is a time and place for those handcuff running backs. Typically, if I have them, I'm willing to just get them off my roster for whatever draft capital I can get and call it a day. I'm not going to try to be greedy or anything like that. I just want the roster space for something else. However, if I am rebuilding or I have undelegated roster space that I don't know what to do with, I'm willing to stash them for a little bit until they are needed and I can flip them for that much more. The second and the last point I have is paying attention to league mates' interest. What players are they bidding on when it comes to fab? Who are they targeting on waivers if your league doesn't do fab? Because if you're on Sleeper, it'll tell you that. And who are they including on their own volition in trade counters? All interest, large or small, can really help sway a deal. If there was somebody that you were targeting on waivers that you ended up getting on your team, and you can see that they had a fab bid on them or a waiver priority ad, whatever the case is, that indicates interest. And you can use that information for leverage, whether immediate leverage, whether leverage down the road if they just happen to have interest in that player and that interest still exists. At some point, they wanted that player on their team. Use that information. And then, like I said, the same can be said for a manager. If you send a trade, they counter with adding another player on their own volition to that offer, adding that player specifically. Keep all of this in mind down the road. Use that now, use it later. If a trade isn't completed at the time of that original ad, you might be able to use that information down the road to get a deal done another day. This next point is very important because it's all about mindset. In Dynasty, we have to use a minimalist mindset to ultimately maximize value. Too often in Dynasty, I think managers fall victim to a hoarder's mindset. We end up holding on to too many assets than we actually need for far longer than we need to. Once you know what a player is, it's time to move on. But this hoarder's mindset leads to overcrowding on rosters, unnecessary cuts, and wasted time with no value return. The last thing I ever want is to have a player's value die on my roster, and then I have to go and cut them with no return of assets or any sort of value coming back my way. Because if I have all these players that could be great, maybe someday they actually will be. Instead, I could be trying to combine assets to work my way up the ladder and tier up those assets to better and better assets. You know, actually improve my roster. On top of all that, I think we just believe that we need more on our teams to actually go and win a championship than what's realistic and that we actually need. You need a strong starting lineup. You need some depth. Depending on the league settings, it might be significantly more or less. And hey, luck never hurt anybody except dumb luck and bad luck. Some luck would be nice for the team too. You get it. But I think at times it's greatly overestimated how much depth you actually need for your roster and how much that you could be trying to convert into high quality starters by bundling some of those pieces together to tier up, like I mentioned. Now, no single one of these practices or mindsets is going to put you over the top. In fact, doing each of them just once isn't going to either. These are moves that are going to compile over time. And the more you utilize these tactical advantages, the easier they'll be able to see the next time they come around. And you'll be able to make that move that much quicker. So when these practices compile over time, you end up with the impact of compounding consistency. Being able to exploit value discrepancies consistently will lead to the abundance of assets that you can convert into the best players possible that will give you your best shot at winning a championship someday. Well, that is it for the video today. I do hope you all enjoyed. Please leave a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. What's a new tactical advantage you picked up today, and what's one you use in your leagues? If you want more tactical advantages, definitely subscribe to the channel. We got you covered. And if you want some more right now, check out either of the two videos on your screen where we discuss how we're winning in 2023 and how we're dominating our leagues this offseason. But hey, that's going to be it for us today. We will see y'all in the next one. But until then, y'all have a good one.